Also, since I'm first, I get to introduce myself. So I'll just say that I am the author of the novel The Pugilist's Wife, which was published a year ago by Texas Review Press. And I currently teach in the English department here on campus. And today what I'm going to do is, since I said this came out last year, I probably read from this more than a dozen times in the past year. So I thought I would read something new to y'all. I just finished my second novel. It's called Harlow. And right now it's circulating among publishers, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed I'll hear some good news about it soon. So what I'm going to do is read the introduction, or the first part of the first chapter of the novel, and then I'll read kind of a funny section, or at least I think it's funny. And the reason I decided to read this is this past weekend I went to the fair. Did any of y'all go to the parish fair in Tangipahoa? Nobody goes to that? Are any of y'all writers? Do y'all consider yourselves writers? Somebody's a writer in here. I know somebody. Grace. So I highly recommend, if you're a writer and you're looking for material to write about, go to a parish fair, because you'll find lots of material to write about. So since I went there, I figured I'd read that little section. There's a part in this novel that takes place at the fair. It's actually in Franklinton, Washington Parish Fair. So just to kind of set it up for a minute, the novel is about a boy who is in search of his father. He doesn't know his biological father. He's never met him. And when he turns 18, he decides to leave home and find out who this guy is. And people always ask, when you're a writer, the question I've gotten in every reading I've done, where did you get the idea from? The first question is, what's the novel about? And the next question is, well, where did you get the idea? And this one simply came from the image. I was driving through Greensburg, Louisiana, if any of y'all know where that is. It's past Kentwood out in that way. And we were driving along the road, and there were these big, big ditches on the side, both sides of the road. And somehow this image just popped into my head of someone lying in one of those ditches, sleeping. And that's usually how these things start, right? These kind of irrational images. And so then the next thing, the question comes up is like, why would somebody be doing that? And then the next question was, so the answer was, well, maybe it's a boy who's camping out there and he's sleeping next to the road. So of course the next question is, why would he be doing that? And so it led to eventually, well, this boy's looking for his father. He's walking through the woods across Louisiana. He's trying to find out where his father lives. And so the idea sort of developed from there. And I don't think it's a coincidence that at the time when I started writing this, I had just had my own son. So I was thinking about fathers and sons, and sort of how powerful that connection can be, or is. So the part I'm going to read to you is this boy's actually just waking up in the ditch, and he's thinking about the day he finally gets to see his father. And so this should just take a couple minutes to read, and then I'll read y'all the scene, which is sort of from the father's point of view. Of the father actually worked at the parish fair, and these sort of odd characters that he comes across there. It was dark. The boy lay down in the swale and rolled the flannel shirt he had been wearing into a cigarette-shaped pillow and placed it under his head. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep as the crickets played a steady hum in the woods around him. A car occasionally drove over the gravel road beyond him, throwing rocks and dirt down and over near the ditch bank where the boy lay shivering now, the red clay loosening from the embankment and powdering the boy's clothes and skin a strange ochre. He tucked his knees into his chest and rubbed his cheek against the warm flannel and looked peripherally at the clear winter sky overhead. Each white star and the full moon seemed holes punched into the myriad blackness surrounding everything. The only thing darker, more black, were the pine trees jutting from the ground like crooked black teeth against the cold and hollow mouth of sky behind them. The boy put his face into the shirt and thought about his father, whom he had never met. His father's name was Harlow Cagwin, and he had been living in Greensburg, Louisiana, the boy's whole life, and now the boy was going to find him. He would walk from Sun, Louisiana, and head west through all the small towns until he got to Greensburg, thinking, I will look just like him. Then he would look for the name, Cagwin Harlow. He imagined it painted on a mailbox. In his mind, the mailbox would be black, and the painted name would be in crooked white letters. This is how he saw it. The boy was bound to find the old man, if old he was. It would be a few days' walk, and the boy would stick to the woods near the highway mainly, and he would think about his father, and he would think about hunting and fishing with him, the things fathers and sons do together. His mother would not miss him. His sisters wouldn't either. They didn't even have the same daddy as him. The boy had packed a satchel with sandwiches on plain white bread with a slice of bologna and a slice of cheese on each one, enough to get him through the woods and to his father's house, where he imagined they'd eat things like venison and mashed potatoes with thick white gravy and buttered biscuits. But that would be later. In the satchel, the boy had also packed a hunting knife and matches, a canteen now filled with murky creek water, 2 flannel shirts, and an extra pair of jeans. It was cold and had dropped into the low 30s the night before, and the boy wrapped himself in the shirts and lit a fire to keep warm. He sat by the fire and ate one of the sandwiches and dreamed about stirring up a covey of birds from some cornfield so that his father could shoot them, each bird dropping one by one after the clop, clop, clop of his Remington 12 gauge, like dark ink spots dripping from the sky. Then the retriever would run to collect what his father had shot, and afterward teaching the boy how to pluck and gut the birds and pitch the trash into the yard for the dog, and the feathers stirring around his legs and the black gore vial on his arms and hands as the sun reddens the rim of the sky in the west, and him all along watching his father out of the corner of his eye, a cigarette dangling from the man's lip as he worked and taught his son how to work. And with that thought, the boy had fallen asleep in the ditch. The boy's name is Leslie, but it's a girl's name and the boy hates it. His last name had been taken from his mother's side, Summers. He doesn't like that either. He plans to change it all to Lester Cagwin after he meets his father. He had thought about his name a lot, and this had always sounded better and more masculine. He would be a hunter and a farmer, a fisherman. Whatever his father was, he wanted to be. Felt he was already that thing, had been all along, and now it was just a matter of finding him and putting a real human face to all of these things that you think about, but that your mind cannot turn into actual words. What Leslie knows about his father is from his mother. He was a drunk and a car swipe. He had been in jail, she told him. They hadn't married. He had never wanted anything to do with the boy, but the boy was 18 now, and his mother didn't want anything to do with him either. His sisters, too. They wouldn't so much as look at him now. He was invisible. He had been expelled from school for fighting, and he did not want to work, and his mother had told him that he had to work or he was going to have to leave. So he left. Then, in the silent and unclocked hours of early morning, he had packed his satchel and walked out of the trailer and into the cold, dark woods, and he did not look back, and he did not leave a note, and he hoped that his mother and sisters would be sufficiently worried about him, because maybe then he wouldn't be so invisible. And now on the third day, the boy gets up from the swale and dusts off the clay and grass from his clothes, and he unrolls his flannel shirt and folds it properly and puts it back into the satchel with his other things, and then pulls the drawstring on the satchel until it is closed, and then he slings the bag over his shoulder and climbs the embankment on the wooded side and walks back into the pine thicket, staying away from the road but keeping west, the sun coming up behind him now and warming his back, despite the cold on the air around him. The boy has one sandwich left and about half a canteen full of water, but he thinks that this is the last day he will need it. He had seen a sign when he had gone to the road yesterday near Holton that said a meet, 12, and he knew that that town was close to Greensburg, so he figured a day's travel would have him there, and then he would find his father and have something good to eat. Leslie walks through the copse over the tangles of kudzu, weaved through the fallen branches like wicker work, and he pushes aside the growth that is in his way. This is hard going, he knows, but he is more afraid of being on the highway and having people see him and pull over and ask him questions. After about 2 hours of walking, the boy stops and sits in a small clearing and removes his burden and places it on the ground, and he puts his back against a pin oak, and then he loosens the drawstring on the satchel and opens it. He takes out the box of matches and puts them on the ground. Then he reaches into his shirt pocket and brings out a pack of cigarettes he had taken from his mother when he left her house the other day, and he lights one of the cigarettes with a match, the sulfured air rising up into his nostrils and stinging his eyes now, too. So that's the boy, Leslie, on his way to meet his father. And along the way, he meets a girl who picks him up and gives him a ride. And eventually he does meet his father. The novel sort of goes back and forth in point of view. It switches from the boy's point of view to the father's point of view. And the father, even though he abandoned his son, uh, is not necessarily a bad guy. You know, he's had a string of bad luck, I guess you could say. And without giving away the end of the book at all, you know, he sort of has this chance to redeem himself when he finally does meet the boy. So the part I'm going to read to you now is pretty much inspired by going to the Tangipahoa Parish Fair. I have two little kids. Of course, they were off of school Friday, so they knew about the fair, so we had to go. And oddly enough, we actually played this very game at the fair where you throw the darts at the balloons. You know, you can win a stuffed animal. And so that's what this part is about. Harlow, the boy's father, he's in prison for a while for stealing cars. When he gets out, he works all these odd jobs, and one of them is working at the fairgrounds. And he's the guy who's behind the booth trying to get everybody to come up and spend money, spend a lot of money to get these cheap little stuffed animals. You know, I think I spent $20, and each one of my kids got this tiny little stuffed animal. But they had fun. They threw the darts, and then they got to win. So the thing about this, I wrote this before this all happened this weekend, and I'm always interested in these what they call grotesque characters. Flannery O'Connor, if y'all have read Flannery O'Connor, talks a lot about the grotesque. And really any Southern literature that is sort of unique to Southern literature, you read about these sort of grotesque characters. And when I write about people like this, I'm always careful not to be irreverent towards them, but more to sort of point out how beautiful people are, even though they may be deformed physically or they may be emotionally deformed in some way. So by no means is this making fun of these characters who are in here. So that's just a disclaimer. So this is the part about the father. He's working at the fair and these kind of strange people he comes across. And the father, if you remember, his name's Harlow, so this is his section. In the first little paragraph, just one more thing to set it up, he's actually, this first paragraph is him just about to get out of prison, and then afterwards he goes and he starts working for the fairgrounds. Harlow read, too, and he also wrote letters to Courtney, though he never sent them. In the letters, he asked about his son, but he really didn't even want to know. He thought it best to imagine the child did not even exist. It was better that way, easier. He hoped that Courtney would move on with her life and forget about him. And so she must have. She never once wrote him or visited him either. And thus the time dragged on until one day his sentence was up and they released him, and he meandered back home where he didn't do much of anything for 15 years. He had worked at the fairgrounds in Franklinton, and sometimes in the fall when the parish fair would come through, he would assist in hawking a useless miscellany of oversized stuffed animals and plastic daggers that you could win if you hit one of the balloons that were tacked to a piece of slate-colored corkboard behind him with one of the colored plastic darts that he held out fan-wise before him like a hand of cards, calling out to the grotesque crowd of fairgoers who slouched past him, only sometimes stopping to try their luck, but otherwise disappearing into the dark and anonymous spate of people among the blinking and buzzing lights of the dusty, hay-strewn midway. Once he met a man with no arms who wanted to try his luck and win a stuffed tiger for his old lady. "But that there's a leopard," Harlow said to the old man, ignoring his handicap. "You still want it?" "Yes, sir, you better believe it. Anything for her." He jerked his head at the haggard woman standing next to him. "Well, let's see what y'all got," Harlow said, still ignoring the logistics of this transaction. He assumed the woman would be the one throwing the darts. $3 gets you 3 darts, $5 gets you 6. The old man looked now to the woman standing at his side and nudged his chin in the direction of his shirt pocket. "See if you can get that 5 out for me, will you?" he said to her. "I'm fixing to win you that there prize." The woman reached her arm across the man's chest and plucked a $5 bill from his shirt pocket and then handed it to Harlow. Harlow took the money and smiled at her. "Thank you," he said. "Uh-huh." The woman looked around nervously as if she thought someone were watching her. Under the dull mauve light leaking out from his booth, Harlow could see this woman's skin was leathery and cracked, tanned to a dusky horse-saddle brown. It was stretched taut across her meager frame of bones, and her 2 jaundiced eyes bulged forth from her white-haired and wild skull, looking into the night as if seeking out an eternal answer in some dark recess only she could ascertain. She smiled at him with a mouth that had been half robbed of fat orange teeth. "He's out of his mind, thinks he can win something at a fair," she said. "He should know these games is fixed. Everything here is fixed, so you'll be the loser." Harlow said, Come on, lady, we have winners here every day. Just think positive, he said. Then he handed the woman the half-dozen darts. These ain't for me, she said. Lonnie wants to win me a stuffed animal. He can shoot for it himself. Harlow looked at her, then at the man standing before him. He didn't say anything. But then the man Lonnie started to sit down, positioning himself on the dusty ground so that he was sitting in front of the booth now. He was using his left foot to remove the torn gray sneaker from his right foot. Can you get my sock for me? He said to the woman now. So the woman bent down and pulled the stained sock from the man's foot, and then she placed one of the darts in the dry, craggy space between his toes. This is utterly ridiculous, she said, standing back up now and looking toward the inflated balloons jerking back and forth over the corkboard, the popped ones hanging there too like strips of hung beef against a smokehouse wall set to cure. Harlow looked down at the gaunt man. There were several people standing around him now too, and they were all watching him. The man brought his leg back until his thigh was touching his chest, and then he flung the leg forward, releasing the dart from between his toes as his knee locked into place and his leg hung now in midair straight as a 2x4. But he missed. The side of the dart hitting the wall, then the dart itself bouncing off and landing in the dust at Harlow's mud-caked boots. Damn, Lonnie said. He looked up to the woman now. Give me another, he told her. The woman bent over again and placed another dart in between the man's toes. Again, he shot. He missed a second time. Give up yet? The woman said to him, looking at her naked wrist, where a watch would have been, but wasn't. He didn't answer, but sat up now in the mild October dust and looked again at his targets. He squinted his eyes at the balloons and rolled his head around on his nubbed shoulders. The flannel shirt he was wearing had had the sleeves cut or torn from it, and you could see through the sleeve holes the two small stumps where once there had been arms. But then you could hear his gray and grizzled cheeks rustling against the flannel like a scouring pad as he continued to roll his head around like some misshapen bowling ball. He cracked his neck. Then the man turned and spat a tan stream of tobacco juice at the ground, yet this time, before lying back, he started to work himself into the ground some by moving his thighs from side to side a bit. Then he lay back in the dirt again, his long gray hair insepulchred by dust and carnival debris. Now I'm ready, he said. I was just warming up before. The woman rolled her eyes, and then she crouched down again and placed another dart in between Lonnie's toes. Once more, he brought back his leg, held it there for a moment as if setting up a tableau, then flung forward, releasing the dart in an almost majestic spiral as the implement hurled itself through the thick and smoky and fluorescent-hued air, and then striking perfectly into its seemingly preordained place in the world. The dart tore through a large yellow balloon and stuck itself firmly into the pocked corkboard behind it. Bullseye, said Lonnie. The sound of the popping balloon seemed to echo still in the dusty air. The people in the crowd clapped and cheered and laughed, some of them. The old woman handed the remaining 3 darts back to Harlow, quickly now, as if she wanted to get away. So does that mean we get our money back on these we didn't use? She said. No, ma'am, but you still get 3 more tries. You can win more stuff, or I mean your husband can. Harlow gestured the darts back toward her, but she pushed his hand away. He don't want to, she said, turning away from Harlow now to see Lonnie standing himself up proudly, but with what seemed a great and painful effort. The old woman dusted off Lonnie's jeans for him, and he tried to kiss her, but she pulled away. Plus, he ain't even my husband, she said. The woman glared now at Harlow. Sorry, he told her. Can we just have the damn leopard, she said. Yes, ma'am, Harlow said. Lonnie still didn't say anything. Then from beside his counter, Harlow took a long yellow broom handle with a hook at the end where the bristles for the broom had once been, and he reached up with it and snagged the leopard from its crowded place on the guy ropes above his head, and then he unhooked it. The other animals that were hanging up there too, falling rightfully into the leopard's vacated space, like tree branches that had been tied down but now have been untied and are bending homeward. And he brought it down, and the woman took it from the end of the stick and hooked her arm around its neck as she pulled Lonnie by the front of his shirt and beseeched him to come on. And then they hastened forth into that sweating and stinking phalanx and into the mild dust in which it pulsed now, where the endless buzzing and clatter of the midway enveloped them together like 2 peripatetic yet lost souls, squandering away their existences in this world without ever even knowing it, but in some dark and visceral place, yet still incessantly searching for that tiny glimpse of light in any place they could find it.